Malachi, 2nd chapter, we've talked about 2 of the 6 dispositions or 6 of the problems, you might say, that God has with Israel at this time. First one was the idea of God's sovereignty, that the people were just not doing what God ordered and didn't feel anything too bad about it. Second one is when he talks to the priest about the way that they were polluting and offering polluted sacrifices and therefore not honoring God. We talked down in verse 13 where they're even saying, hey, it's a problem to serve God. I mean, there's no benefit from it. It's just tiring. And a lot of people get that way. I mean, I'm guilty of this. I've woke up some mornings and I think, I just don't want to go to church today. Yeah, wrong attitude. And I know that, so I work on that. And when you go, guess what? That disappears. You know, why? Because you're before your God and things go right. As you get into chapter 2 and verse 10, you have the third disposition. This one, again, is directed by some commentators specifically to the priesthood, others more generally to all of Israel. And I think whichever way you go, it comes out the same, because the priests were representative of, and supposed to be the upholders of the faith. And so if they start perverting the faith, guess what? The people are going to start perverting the faith. It just permeates everything. And one of the things, this disposition or this problem starts in verse 10 of chapter 2 and goes to the first part of chapter 3. In verse 16, and we'll get to this and we'll talk about it hopefully at length if I don't blow my time. Verse 16, in a lot of commentaries or a lot of authorities in translation look at this as one of the hardest verses to translate out of the entire Hebrew Bible. It basically boils down to 2 different applications or 2 different translations, and we'll talk about them and their differences to some point. But then when he picks up in verse 17, really neither one of those 2 translations makes a lot of difference because the application is the same. But just so you're aware of that. If you start in verse 10, we'll just read through this and we'll come back and kind of make some points. He says, have we not all one Father? Has not one God created us? Why then are we faithless to one another, profaning the covenant of our fathers? Judah has been faithless, and an abomination has been committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah has profaned the sanctuary of the Lord, which he loves. He has married the daughter of a foreign god. May the Lord cut off from the tents of Jacob any descendant of the man who does this, who brings an offering to the Lord of hosts. And this second thing you do, you cover the Lord's altar with tears, with weeping and groaning, because he no longer regards the offerings or accepts it with favor from your hand. But again, that little phrase, but you say, why does he not? Because the Lord was witness between you and the wife of your youth, to whom you have been faithless, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. Did he not make them one with a portion of the Spirit in their union? And what was the one God seeking? Godly offspring. So guard yourselves in spirit, and let none of you be faithless to the wife of your youth. The man who does not love his wife, but divorces her, says the Lord, the God of Israel, cover his garment with violence, says the Lord of hosts. So guard yourselves in spirit, and do not be faithless. For you have wearied the Lord with your words, but you say, how have we wearied him? By saying, everyone who does evil is good in the sight of the Lord, and he delights in him, or by asking, where is the God of justice? Now, that whole point, or the main point of this disagreement, has to do with marriage. And if you think back when God brought the people out of Egypt and gave them the law, and you start looking at all the different aspects of the Mosaic law, given in Leviticus or Deuteronomy or all, first 5 books when all this was going on, what was one of the reasons God chose the people of Israel as his people? And again, you got to remember, he chose them. They didn't choose him.
They were the least of them all.
Excuse me?
They were the least.
Yeah, they were the least of the people. God chose them to be an example to the world what it means to be God's people. And as God's people, the blessings that come with God being your God. I mean, you look at all the times through most of the Old Testament where God reminds them, I am the God that brought you out of Egypt with a mighty arm and a strong right hand, and you think about the relationship that was supposed to ensure of God's blessings. And didn't always happen, did it? One of the things that is kind of unique. When did the people of Israel become saved or delivered? What was the defining point of their deliverance?
Passover.
Yeah, the Passover, exactly. When the last of the plagues, they put the blood on the doorpost, on the lintel, and God passed through, and if the blood was there, what? They were delivered. That was the final thing that Pharaoh said, hey, get out of here. Gave them a bunch of money and cattle and just said, scram, we're tired of this, So that was the day of their deliverance. And if you go back to Exodus, you look at the 11th, 12th chapters, he talks about that. In chapter 14, verse 30 and 31, he says, I saved you when I delivered you from Egypt. Okay, if they were saved then, what's the purpose of the law? They didn't get the law till what? After they got to Mount Sinai. And if you're moving 1 million people from Egypt into the Sinai desert, that's more than a 1 or 2 day journey, I don't know how long that actually took, but it took a while. So, if, as a lot of people believe, they were saved by the law, that doesn't match up with what God said.
I was going to say it took 3 months to get them out.
Okay, 3 months. They were already saved. So what was the law?
To show us that we couldn't keep it.
Huh?
To show us that we couldn't keep it.
Yeah, show us we couldn't keep it. But, if you look at Paul in Romans talks about, by the law came a knowledge of sin. Okay, sin is what? What you're not supposed to do. Which means also then, the law gave us what? What we're supposed to be doing. And that's the point that Malachi is making. You guys have the law. You know what that law defined, how to be the people of God, to have that relationship with God, and now you're not keeping it. You're saying it's troublesome. You're saying it's not worth anything. And part of that law was that as God's people, they were to be separate or holy from all other peoples. The law defined what they ate, what they couldn't eat. It defined how they were supposed to worship God. If you did this, how you related to your fellow Jews, if there was a sin committed, accidental death or a death of an animal, it told you what you had to do to make it all right.
How you dress.
Huh?
How you dress, how you wear your hair.
Yeah, everything. And it was all what? Different from any other nation in the world. And that's why all the other nations hated them. Because they weren't supposed, you weren't supposed to marry outside of the Jewish faith. You had to keep it pure or holy as God's people.
And God says, I did that so that what? The nations, the other people, would understand God. All right, so Malachi, or God's point, beginning in verse 10 of chapter 2, is that people were marrying outside of the Jewish faith. They were marrying the peoples that were around them. The Israelites, the Ammonites, Hittites, name the group, somebody took a wife. And even more so, if you go over to Ezra, the 9th chapter, and again, Ezra is living at the same time of Malachi. In Ezra 9, verses 1 and 2, he says, and after these things had been done, the officials approached him and said, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites are not separating themselves from the people of the lands with their abominations. From the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, the Amorites, for they have taken some of their daughters to be wives for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy race has mixed itself with the peoples of the lands. And again, over in chapter 10, he talks about the same thing. If you go to Nehemiah 13, in verse 23, he says, but in those days I saw the Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod, and they could not speak the language of Judah. I mean, it was a common practice to marry people that were not of the Jewish race. So that broke the covenant that God had made with them about being separate. So what's the problem? I mean, besides covenant breaking.
Leads to idolatry.
Yeah, it leads to idolatry. It leads to watering down, as Nehemiah said, they couldn't even speak the language. And so, how do you communicate with your fellow Jews if you're speaking Ashdod instead of Hebrew? Two totally separate things. But it wasn't just the idea of the language barriers. It was what? Taking Judaism and putting it in the temptation of mixing in not only the languages, but the customs and the beliefs of the unbelievers, the people that were not in a covenant relationship with God. There are a lot of things you can say about covenants. We talk about the Old Covenant, or the Old Testament, the New Testament. What does the word covenant mean? What is a covenant?
Agreement.
Yeah, it's an agreement. We might liken it a lot of times, and a little bit not really the best, like a will is a lot of times what we present it, and there are aspects of it, but even a will is just an agreement. It's a contract. You have one party and another party that somehow either having a disagreement or want to enter into an agreement. So they stipulate in that agreement what they're after, what the terms are, as well as what? What happens if you break that covenant or that agreement? You break a contract,
Get nothing.
yeah, you're legally obligated to, make it good, and they can do, depending on the judge, I guess, they can do some nasties to you that make you want to make it right. But the idea is that through that agreement, just like all the peace talks we have, in the world today, we make an agreement, we're not going to go to war again. And, usually, same day or the day after, somebody shoots somebody and away goes the covenant. It was a bad thing. And covenants with God, obviously, are of utmost importance. So, when God made the covenant with Abraham, or made the promise to Abraham, I'm going to, through his seed, all nations will be blessed. And then you have the covenant made at Mount Sinai with the law and the people of Israel being the holy, separate people of God. In Malachi's time, Ezra and Nehemiah, and actually before then, it was being broken because they were marrying people of the countryside. Why would you do that? What's the attraction of marrying other people, other groups of people? Would have been a problem maybe, or a reason for it.
Rebellion?
Huh?
Rebellion?
Yeah, I mean, it is rebellion, but why do we water down anything? Why do we compromise?
Make it look good.
Lack of choices?
Huh?
Lack of choices?
Yeah, some of it may be lack of willpower, but I mean, usually compromise is a way of doing away with what?
The law.
Trouble. I mean, if somebody doesn't like you because you're this way, and you compromise to be liked by them, it takes away some hostility, right? It takes away some problems that might occur as being friendly, if you want to say, to one another. Whereas if I stay as I am, there's going to be a lot of people not going to like me because I'm not giving in, or I don't agree with the way they live. I don't want to indulge in the way they live. As a preacher, I preach against the way they live, that gets you some opposition. Now, I was heard, and I think experience has kind of maybe proved it to be somewhat true. There are two things that, as a preacher, are going to happen to you. One of them, there's not going to be a lot of people that want to be real friendly with you because they're afraid they might be next Sunday's sermon. Yeah, maybe so. Not really. The other is that, you're a good preacher as long as we got a brother so-and-so over here, he's a drinker and he's this and that, and as long, so you preach sermons on that, you're fine, but if you preach on this and I'm doing it, now you're meddling, so you kind of get thrown into some situations there. Yeah, that happens occasionally. Not really, but I mean, it is something. But as Malachi, or God, looks at the people, he says they're profaning the covenant because they are marrying, as he says, the daughter of a foreign god. Now that tells you something about the problems that brings up. What about Samson? Samson was what? He took a specific vow, right? He was a Nazarite. And there were specific conditions. So, what's the first thing he does to break that?
He gives them a place to worship as well, all of these wives.
Yeah. He found a woman that he wanted as wife. I guess she was good looking. I don't know. I mean, whatever it was that draw. And she was not a Jew. And we all know how that went. The people wanted to get rid of Samson, and they kept trying to find out what his strength was, and he kept not telling her the truth, but she nagged him enough or bothered him enough. He finally spills the beans, and wham, everything goes downhill. Solomon, the wisest man ever. This always blows my mind. Had 1,000 wives and concubines. Now, you got to remember, Solomon was the one that God allowed to build the temple. To replace the tabernacle, they built this huge, fancy, elaborate, everything given goes to worship God in. What did Samson's wives and concubines wind up causing Solomon to do?
Sin against the Lord.
Excuse me?
Sin against the Lord. Build temples for
Yeah,
God.
he built temples for what? For what his wives believed.
Right.
I mean, there's a strong belief if you get into East Africa. At the time when we lived in Ethiopia, Haile Selassie was still alive. He was the last emperor of what would have been the Kushite or the Ethiopian Empire. And the story is that we all know from the Bible, the Queen of Sheba, Kush, or where Ethiopia is, went all the way to Jerusalem to visit Solomon to see if the stories that she heard about his riches and his wisdom were true, and was. Well, the idea promoted, or at least believed, and some historians, there's some history to maybe back it up, that she became either a wife or a concubine of Solomon. And so when she went back to Ethiopia, or the land of Cush, obviously her children went with her. And so Haile Selassie was supposed to be a descendant of David and the Queen of Sheba's children. And so that's why if you get used to on the Ethiopian money, there was a lion, the tribe of Judah. Because Haile Selassie claimed to be a descendant through Solomon. Now whether that's true or not, again, there's a lot of argument, a lot of history that can be thrown in. But the idea is, again, as God looks at the people, particularly the priesthood, as Ezra talked about, were intermarrying with non-Jews. They were breaking a covenant relationship with God. That is obviously terrible in its own sense. But if you'll notice in verse 13, the second thing you do, you cover the Lord's altar with tears and weeping and groaning because he no longer regards your offerings. In other words, they go to God, oh God, save us, oh God, give me this, or oh God, make me well, or do this or that. And God, they're looking at it, God just kind of twiddling his thumbs. Why would God withhold answering their blessings?
Because of the evil that
They
they were
were
doing.
wanting the right.
Yeah, again, what he just said. You guys broke the covenant. What happens in the legal agreement if you break the agreement?
Punishments.
You got to make good on it. In other words, if one person breaks that covenant, then it frees the other person from what? Being bound by it, right?
Right.
I mean, you look at, and this is a really important point to me, because you look at the people of Israel back from Moses until the time of Nehemiah, Ezra, and Malachi, and on in, before the coming of Christ. They had been in this covenant relationship with God all that time. But what's history tell us, from Bible history tell us about the people of Israel in relation to that covenant? Were they faithful?
No.
No. They broke it over and over and over again. And yet, what does God do?
Forgives.
He stays faithful. The promise he talks about to David, that he'll never lack one on the throne. And you'll see sometimes that some of his children, when they were king after David's death, they were, some of them, not good kings, not good Jews as far as keeping the covenant. God allowed them to stay on the throne because of that promise to David. And after they died, then somebody else took over and God kept things going. God was not bound to do that, except what? He was determined to do that. Because God is faithful. And that's the point Malachi is making, or God's making through Malachi, to the priesthood in particular. You guys are supposed to be, again, that mediator between God and man. They were supposed to take God's wishes to man and let them know what would make that relationship, that fellowship, that covenant that they had with him. And so if they're messing it up, then they're teaching what? Sin. They're advocating, hey, do this, it's fine, look at us. You know, we're the people of God. And then, you know, you could wonder how any of the Jews would ever think, well, what is right and what's wrong? Because again, the priests were the ones that what? Expounded the law, followed the sacrifices. They were the ones that the people came to find out what they needed to do if they knew they had sinned or thought they had sinned, what the sacrifice was supposed to be, and then the priest would offer it. So if they're, going back to the other chapter, weary of serving God and just kind of lackadaisical going through the process, what's that going to filter down to the rest of the people?
That's what they did.
Same attitude, you know. If we're supposed to follow the example of the priests being the really holy, separated people of God, that tribe of Levi, look what they're doing, then that's what we need to be doing. And if you think I'm exaggerating, sometimes look at how you view your preacher. You know, preacher's wife, their kids are put on a pedestal, and if any one of them does something screwy, oh wait, that preacher's screwed up. I mean, we kind of put ourselves in that situation, I guess, but really it shouldn't exist. And that's kind of what God is saying through Malachi. He says, you're coming to me with weeping and all this stuff, and you say, why are you not answering our prayers? Why are you not accepting our sacrifices? Notice what God's answer is. Because the Lord is witness between you and the wife of your youth, to whom you have been faithless, though she is your companion and your wife. And notice what he says. By what? Covenant. Two places where that word is used specifically in relation to marriage is here and in Proverbs 2:17. And it's pretty well displayed in Ezekiel 11:8 through 14. You know, marriage today really doesn't exist, not as God defines it. We have, never mind what I'm going to say. It's a mess. And a lot of people go into marriage with, well, if it doesn't work, what?
Just get out.
Yeah, I can get out of, I can get a divorce, and you can for about any reason you want to make up now.
Amen.
And then what? Try again. I'm not one for statistics a whole lot, but I will throw this one out. Most people that have divorced once usually wind up 2 to 3 to 4. Can't count. It becomes a habit. Why? Why would I just throw away my wife or a wife throw away her husband?
I get
That
it.
happens too. You know, incompatibility.
Selfishness.
Yeah, selfishness.
Abuse.
I don't like you anymore. When we first met, oh, you were giving me all this good stuff. And guess what? Now it's routine. I want something new, so we go find somebody else. Maybe I got ugly. I was ugly to begin with. But, you know, maybe I got ugly. I want somebody better looking. I want somebody younger. I want somebody that my wife fooled me, and I believe this wholeheartedly. When we were dating, a lot of my dates were sitting, shelling beans or chucking corn with her parents, which is not a bad thing because I ate a lot of that stuff. We went fishing. I still like to fish. I haven't fished in 50 years, but I still like to do it. And she would go fishing with me. The only thing bad about fishing with her is I had to bait the hook. And after we married, I still got to fish, but I fished with my brother-in-law, no longer with my wife, because my wife and her sister stayed at home and did whatever they did, you know. So she was really not a fisherman. So she fooled me on that one. You know? But that was beside the point. When you look at the idea of that covenant, and he even mentions it here, he says, did he not make them one, referring back to Genesis 2, when God gave Eve to Adam and they became one flesh, he says what? With a portion of the Spirit in their union. What does that mean? He says, what was the one God seeking? Godly offspring. God has a part in marriage. It's not just a man and woman deciding, okay, we're going to get married and that's it. I mean, we always talk about the marriage what? Vows, right? And I don't care what religion you want to look at. Well, I shouldn't say that. Most religions, most societies look at a man and a woman marrying and they frown if they divorce. I mean, even the most primitive societies recognize some form of marriage. You know, that's not an accident. God instituted it. God has always been involved. I mean, again, who gave Eve to Adam? Wasn't Eve's choice, was it? Or at least not the way Scripture puts it. He made woman out of the rib, and he gave her to Adam. And they were the mother and the father, or the great, how many greats it goes, grandparents of everybody. And as he says, what was the purpose? Godly offspring. No different with the Jews. No different with us. Now, I know some preachers and some people that believe it is sinful to marry outside of the church. I don't think the Bible teaches that. If you want to say it's not advisable, it's not the best choice, but God's not going to condemn you if you do. Why would I? How could I say that? Is there any scripture that would support that it's not a sin? Now let's think for a minute.
You believe that a Christian can bear?
Don't be unequally yoked.
Yeah. He says don't be unequally yoked. So again, that's one reason some people say you shouldn't marry outside the church. Is there any scripture that deals with somebody that's married to somebody outside the church? No, go to Corinthians. Paul gives advice to a woman that has married a husband that is a non-believer. Does he say, get rid of him?
Nope, don't divorce.
Yeah, he says, stay with him.
Married him in the first place. Why?
Because by your chaste conversation or your chaste way of life, you might convert him.
That's someone that's already.
Yeah, that's somebody that's already been there. Yeah, the wise thing, obviously, is to marry somebody that believes like you do. Because then you both have the same commitment to the same God. And you know the blessings that come from it. And so we raise our children up, hopefully, to be godly offspring. But he goes on, he says, so guard yourselves in your spirit, and let none be faithless to the wife of your youth. Now, you know, if you go to Matthew 19 and verse 5, Christ kind of deals with this same concept when he talks about marriage. Oh, come on. He says, well, go back to verse 3, get the context a little bit. The Pharisees came to him and tested him by asking, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? He answered, have you not read that he who created from the beginning made him male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his wife and his mother and hold fast to his wife, the two shall become one flesh. They are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let no man separate. And then they go on and give this example, you know, go about divorcing and marrying and all that kind of junk. But isn't it unique that both Malachi and Christ start with marriage where?
In the beginning.
Genesis 2. And the fact that Christ said, what God has joined together, again, are we not part of the Spirit in our union? Malachi? They got the same picture of marriage. It's a covenant relationship. And God's part of the covenant. So the fact that the Jews were intermarrying with other tribes, other people, and most often it was, again, a matter of convenience. This takes the pressure off me. If I marry someone of their own race, they're not going to look at me all that bad. They'll treat me better than they're treating the Jews, because the Jews, again, are what? Separate. They're keeping their fellowship with God and not with the neighbors around them, just to be peaceful or get a benefit or whatever, because they lose the benefit of that relationship with God. And we have to be careful about doing that, because we can sell ourselves short by our relationships and the way we view those relationships and the things we take with it. And so you go back to Malachi, verse 16. This is the problem verse as far as translation. And I'm reading from the ESV. It says, "For the man who does not love his wife but divorces her, says the Lord God, the God of Israel, covers his garment with violence, says the Lord of hosts. So guard yourselves in spirit and do not be faithless." If you read it from the King James Version, verse 16 says, "For the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. For one covereth violence with his garment, said the Lord of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit, that you deal not treacherously." Now, do you catch the difference? Probably not, because I didn't either. Okay, the ESV is the way the translators take the language of that verse, is that God hates divorce. The way the King James does it, and it's true more to the original King James, the 1611 version, is God hates the man that divorces. Now you see the difference in emphasis? One is on the idea of divorce, the other is on the man that divorces. Practical application, it's the same thing. If we do sin, if we commit sin, then what's our relationship to God?
Messed up, destroyed.
Yeah, Isaiah 59:1-2. Sin separates us from God. It is spiritual death. So, God obviously doesn't like the sin, but he also doesn't like the sinner at that point, because again, he's breaking that fellowship, that covenant that we make with God when we enter into living for God. Giving ourselves a living sacrifice in Romans 12, or denying self, taking up our cross, Matthew 6. We're entering into a covenant relationship with God as his people. We become sons of God and heirs of the promise. No different than what the Jews believed about God being their God and them being his people. So, the idea that when you divorce her, you hate her. Can you ever think of an Old Testament character that had more than one wife, that hated one and loved the other?
Yeah.
Who's the primary? How about Jacob?
Jacob.
Leah and Rachel. always mess this up, because sometimes I throw Joseph in there for some reason, I don't know why, just because they got J's, I guess. But you know, Jacob worked for, you know, Laban for what? 7 years, is that right? 7?
Yeah.
Yeah, worked a number of years anyway. And he thought he was getting who? Rachel.
Leah.
And they pulled a switcheroo and he wound up with Leah. So what does Jacob do? Works another 7 years and he gets Rachel. And several places it says he loved Rachel but hated Leah. Just loved her less. I don't think he was antagonistic towards her. I mean, Leah gives birth to a whole bunch of tribes, you know, and then we have Israel and the nation of Israel. But the idea of being, as he says, if you don't love your wife and you put her off for divorce, and again here, more than likely taking Ezra and Nehemiah and again some things he's already mentioned about marriage, is the idea that you're taking on another wife just because you're displeased with the one you got. Maybe she got ugly, or maybe you find out she couldn't cook. Thankfully, Cheryl's a good cook. You know, any reason comes up with. You're just taking another wife, and again, maybe it's just to make your life easier with the people that you're around. Maybe you live in a neighborhood that's mostly Hittites, so you take a Hittite wife so they'll leave you alone. You know, just count you as one of the bunch. But that's the point. We're never supposed to be one of the bunch, unless the bunch is the people of God. Now that bunch is a good bunch. That's where we want to belong. And if you're going to belong there, then what? You have to live that way. Because in living that way, that's where you find the blessing. That's where you find God, the glory, and all the things that he gives to you. The phrase in both King James and the ESV, he covers his garment with violence. That's kind of a Hebrew idiom. If this suit was covered in cow nasty and hay and dirt and filth, what would you think of me if I came to church with a suit, nice suit, but all covered in cow manure?
Ugh.
Yeah. For one thing, you'd smell it. It wouldn't look good. You just say, man, you're dirty. That's the idea. If in our mind and our personality, we're going to cover ourselves with rebellion to God, I'm way over time, I knew it was going to happen, then what? We're guilty. And we'll pick up a little bit there real quickly next week and move on to the fourth problem God has with us. Thank you.